Hey, welcome to another Tech Tool Tip segment here in CarCast's. This segment is sponsored by Discount Tires. And in the West and the West Coast here in California, it's America's Tire. Don't forget to check them out online, www.discounttire.com. They're there for your every tire need, free tire rotation, safety checks, and rims and, of course, tires. Don't forget, hit them up, www.discounttire.com. And now let's get back into the Tech Tool Tip segment here. Today's segment's on wiring and electricity, automotive specifically, and we're going to just scratch the surface and show some tools, some wires, some gadgets, and let you guys do a little research online and find out more about the stuff. But we'll give you a little bit of flavor of some of the stuff that you might encounter while doing some wiring work and some electrical work or diagnostics on your car. And let's jump in with the most basic piece of the wiring job, the wire. Wire is available in many different shapes, sizes, strand count, solid core, all this stuff. The main thing is to make sure when you're doing automotive wiring that you use automotive spec wire. Some hardware store wires or housing wire or extension cord wire, probably not the greatest thing to use. Probably going to cause a problem or a fire, worst case. This is sometimes referred to as secondary wire. It's available in many different colors, in spools. This stuff is Teflon wire for very, very high temperature use. It's much more expensive than the typical stuff. There's different grades. If you look at some of the places online, you'll see the different varieties, and again, make sure you get the right wire for your car. Underhood temperatures can be really high. If you use regular wires, meltdown, short circuit, likely a fire. So be cautious of this and check around, look online, and get the right wire. The other thing that's important about wiring in your car is the current capacity of it. Car systems are nominally 12 volts, and you'll see them 13.5, 13.8 while running. But typically we can just call them 12-volt systems. It's a low voltage system. You're not going to get shocks by tampering with it, but generally you'll find higher current draw on some of the wires. Lights today, headlights, starters, everything draws a lot of juice. So you need to make sure that for the type of device you're running that you have the appropriate thickness of wire or gauge of wire. And we'll throw some links for online for determining that, but you typically measure the current, the length of the wire, and that will tell you the gauge that you need to make the run. With most cases, it's pretty straightforward. And you can always do better by using a thicker wire when in doubt. So these are typical small primary wires or just regular wires. These are high temp rated. You try and want to go towards those, or at least automotive grade wires. The next one that we'll find in the car is the old spark plug wire. These are starting to become more extinct with coil on a plug where you don't have any wires, which is kind of a nice feature, but still old cars and still pretty common to have wires. These are some really thick racing wires from Taylor. Highly recommend them. No plug, but it's really good stuff to have for your race car. These are typically for delivering very high voltages to your spark plug, 50,000 plus volts. You don't want to tamper with this stuff while the car is running, or it'll put you down. Trust me. So those are sometimes referred to as secondary wires, but spark plug wires are a little different type of design. They're typically silicone, very thick, multiple layers to them with some fiberglass in there. May or may not have a solid wire, maybe a spiral core of copper wound on carbon impregnated on a piece of fiberglass, some crazy materials. Can't use it for regular wiring, just for spark plug wires. The next one in our road of wires is the battery cable, and this is some big, thick welding cable that I use for the race cars. Because I like to have a good heavy gauge wire for the starters. When you're running battery from the trunk, it's a good idea to step up the thickness of your battery cable. As you run a longer wire, you need a thicker gauge typically. The starter is probably one of the most it's the highest current drawing device in your car, and thus you'll see it with the thickest wire. This is stuff I've got at a welding supply. Probably overkill, but that's, again, how we always work here at CarCast. Over the top with the equipment. The next stuff we're going to kind of jump quickly into is wire coverings and accessories for the wires. And some of the more common ones that you see in auto shops and in kits for building harnesses are heat shrink tubing. It's available in many different thicknesses and different shapes and colors, or I guess it's always tubing, but sometimes it comes flat. This is great stuff. You can do it with a hair dryer, a paint remover gun, or just a regular heat gun. In a pinch, you can use, if you're careful, a propane torch. But this is really good stuff. Shrinks up significantly, keeps water out of your wires and splices, and it's really handy. It's pretty cheap, simple stuff. It makes your harnesses look nice if you're putting together connectors and things. The last couple are wiring protection devices, and sadly I forgot to bring in the one that's the most common and the ugliest of all. Is the plastic nylon convoluted tubing that is a split down the middle, and it's similar to operating like this, but it's a solid, not a mesh. These are really nice because they keep dirt out of your harnesses, they keep things from abrading into the wiring, and as you put wires into it, it's split, so it's easy to keep adding if you add new wires to your harness. And it's, you know, some people think it looks nice. I use it sparingly, but I try to use it when I want to keep the wires from getting ground up onto the chassis or braided steel or something that's sharp edge. This helps a little bit with that. And you should always use grommets if you're going through a firewall or something, as a side note. The last two are high temperature coverings for your wires. This is a really nice one if you're running wires near your starter and need to run a couple of wires for the starter solenoid and you're having trouble with the wires melting, you're not fortunate enough to have some Teflon wiring. This is a high temp fiberglass sheathing that goes over the wire. It's available in many different diameters. Comes in rolls of 10 to 50 feet, I think. A lot of online automotive wiring places carry this stuff, and this is great stuff because it can keep wires from getting burnt down if near some hot devices like a turbo or your headers, which tend to make problems for a lot of wiring harnesses as they get near it. And the last one, and this is a really small one, but it's essentially that same fiberglass coating, fiberglass wire covering like the bigger brother. However, it's also given an additional coating of a gray silicone. This keeps also moisture out and a little bit more heat out. And this is a much more expensive covering. It's available in many different sizes as well. This is the premium one. It's a lot more expensive. Both of these have the one drawback is they're not split, and you have to think ahead. So before you put connectors, typically you got to get your heat shielding on. So it's important to think ahead if you're going to be running stuff and routing it near really high temp devices. So we've covered a little bit of wires and some of the coverings, and like I said, we're just scratching the surface. I think one of the most important things for me for doing automotive wiring harnesses or doing great wiring is the tools that you use to make it. And yeah, I can't stress this enough. You can build a harness with a pair of vice grips and some snips. It'll probably be fine. You can do a great job. You can do a much better job having the right tools, and it depends how often you're going to do this, which would determine how much you want to spend. I do this enough where I bought some really premium tools. Each one has a particular purpose, and these are typically ratcheting tools. They have special dies particular for the connector that they're crimping, and they make a really nice solid connection, something that that you're not going to worry about while in the middle of the $6 million race that the one wire falls off and your car dies. So if you're really trying to do high-end stuff, don't bother with the cheap stuff. Go buy the customized crimps for your thing. And this does a nice double crimp on it and holds it in place, and if we had a wire in there, you wouldn't be able to pull it out. But it just makes the job really easy. And they're ratcheting, which makes them guaranteed to get the crimp right. You're never sure if you got it with the other kind. This locks in and releases only when it's done. The other variants of this, again, here's another tool for a different type of connector. Each connector size for the wire is labeled. And again, another ratcheting connector that guarantees the crimp is to spec, which is really what you're trying to do. The last kind of high-end one is a spark plug wire crimp, and this is a really nice tool. I can't tell you how many times I've fuddled around with the vise tool, and we'll show you that in a second, for doing crimps on spark plug wires. This is the same type of tool, precision dies for the right size of wire, and it's a perfect crimp every time. Your wires aren't going to pull out when you do the yank on the plug technique. The alternative to that is, if you don't have one of those, is the in-vise smasher. This one was from Excel, from an old kit I got for a 9mm probably 20 years ago. I don't even know if they give these anymore, but it's a nice simple kit. You put this in the vise and you hit that with a hammer. A lot less confidence in that than with this tool. And this was about, I think, $60 retail, something along those lines. The last couple tools I'll show you are the standard wire strippers. This is my favorite one, the Klein Tools wire stripper. It just has a wicked sharp blade. It's the right, it cuts anything. Teflon wire is difficult to strip. This thing does a great job on it. They make a couple of different models of this. The yellow handle one is for a different set of size of wires. There's a red handle one for smaller gauge wires. And this is a really good tool. Not that expensive. These are maybe about $15 and worthy of your toolbox. The other one is the generic brother. And this one you find in hardware stores and, you know, Osh, Home Depot, Lowe's, those type of places. And you can get the Klein one there too. But this is the generic one, the electrician's friend. It has everything on it. It's the efficient magician of wire stripping tools. You can do small gauge spark plug wires. You can do crimps on here. You can cut small bolts on it by screwing it in and chopping it. It'll strip a variety of different gauge wires. It has a pair of pliers on it. You know, it slices, it dices. It does, you know, does nothing great. It's kind of awkward to use, but it's a good racetrack toolbox because you can have one tool that does a few things, and in an emergency this can come in handy. So that's a good one. My last secret tip is, and I've run into this and not had the luxury of the specific spark plug wire crimper, is using if you get this, a crimper for doing satellite and cable TV. This is a reasonably low cost one. I think it was about 15, 20 bucks. And it has a nice thick jaw and die, and I've used this to do some spark plug wires in the past and found it has had some amazingly great results. So in a pinch I'll use this thing without a doubt, but check it. You want to make sure that what you're using really does work and just doesn't look like it worked. Give it the tug test. That's a great way to tell if the wire is working and held in place right. So those are some tools. There's a handful of distributors that sell this stuff. You don't find a lot of specialty tools at some of the simpler automotive places, but you look around the web and you'll find the place that sell all the terminals, and they'll have the proper crimping equipment for it. So let's move a little bit down the bench here, and we're getting into, as we start simple, we'll get more complicated. The next stuff that we'll show is just a quick overview of just some of the crimps and lugs that are available, and there's 1,000 more here. I just took a handful out, ran out the door, and grabbed these. If you look at them, there's an interesting thing that they've done for you is they try and color code the wire size for you. So as you see different sizes, you can a different color, you can generally assume that there's going to be a different wire size associated with a terminal. So it makes it easy if you're grabbing a 12 gauge terminal versus a 22 gauge terminal. It just makes it easy so you don't get confused. And you want to use the right terminal size for the right wire size, and it all goes well. Again, some of the times when I do these, I'll do a crimp and I'll have heat shrink on it, so I'll get a double secure anti-vibration type of connection. So I go overkill. You probably don't need to do that, but that's just me, and again, overbuilding as always. So we talked a little bit about the crimps, and like I said, there's a million of these online. There's some battery lug ones that are slightly different, and these aren't insulated, although they do make them, but typically they're not. And after you do these, you want to heat shrink these or make sure they're well wrapped. Especially as the connectors get bigger, it usually implies a lot more current. So one of the things also that we didn't show was the battery lug one, and this looks like a complicated device, but actually this was about $25, I think, or maybe even a little less. It's a really simple device for doing heavy gauge cabling, and all you do is you put the terminal in there. Your cable obviously would be already inserted in there, and you pop the thing down and it holds it and spring loaded, and you whale on it with a sledgehammer or a big ball peen hammer, and we'll put a crimp, and then you move it down and get a second or third crimp in it, and it does a really nice job of a permanent connection for battery cables. And this is a really simple one. The other alternative is a gigantic bolt looking device, and they're about $200 or $300. Although you can make one if you get a $35 bolt cutter and a grinder, but we'll say that for another episode. So that's some of the crimps and things that we have. have, and of course, you know, spark plug wires and boots, they're a little bit different. So let's show a couple of quick loose and odds and ends on our parts table here that people should be familiar with. If they aren't, it's a good time to get acquainted with it. The standard relay. This thing is in every modern car. You won't find this in a '69 Chevelle or older American cars, not too much. But these are originally, I want to say, European relays, I'm guessing. But anybody that's had a Volkswagen, old BMW or something, swapping these relays out to make their car run good and well. Inside of this is really just a little coil that gets energized, and when it does, the contact moves over. And there's a variety of different formats for the contacts, but essentially it's just a really simple relay that's automotive grade, and we just crack the lid off of that, and they're not typically supposed to be openable up. That's one type of relay. The other type of relay is kind of it's a little different. It's the old school flasher. This is something you'd find in, you know, older American cars, older foreign cars before they got too high-teched up and electronic. This is basically a two-terminal flasher. They have a couple varieties of these, but basically how this works is inside of it there's a little heating element that heats a metal strip, and when it gets hot, the contacts open, and when it cools down a second, the contacts close, and that's the cycle that makes your blinkers flash. So if you have a car that the blinkers are blinking really fast or really slow, this might be the culprit, and it just plugs right in, typically the fuse block. So that's another one. The last couple that we'll go over here, devices, are fuses, and I only brought a couple out because everybody knows pretty much what they look like. The old school glass fuse, this is something that you would see in older cars. Sometimes in the German cars, they may not be enclosed in glass, or European cars. Most American cars are the glass enclosed kind. The more modern fuses are the blade fuses, and sometimes harder to tell if they're blown or not, but a lot easier to take out, and usually the current rating is stamped on these somewhere. So important, again, never to change the fuse rating to something other than what it's stated in the manual or on the fuse block itself. If you have a 15 amp fuse and you don't have one, you know, maybe in a pinch, throw a 20 amp to get your car to the auto parts store, but bad idea to change your fuse to a higher rating unless you understand what you're doing. And I think that's it. I think, you know, we'll cover a couple of these things in just quick passing. Some of the bigger connectors, you might use these things for high-powered battery jumpers or alternator. I use the larger Anderson power connectors for connecting my jump battery to the car at the racetrack. All the cars have them, and they're all wired up the same way, so one battery can jump any car. You could even really use the small ones. These things will do nowhere near the current capacity of the big ones, but these are nice. They're extremely durable. They pop together. They pop apart. They're not that expensive, and they're a good quality connector. So that's some of the other stuff. The last connector that I'll show is the Packard Weather Pack. These are my favorite automotive connectors for some reason. I don't really know why. I just kind of like the way they look. When you put them together, they're waterproof. Every bit of them has a seal. The front part has a seal. The connectors, when you make the pins in the back, have a seal in the back, and they're really tight locking. I've used them on a ton of projects, and they're impervious to water, grease, dirt, and grime. They come in a bunch of different configurations. And again, these require a special crimper tool for the pins, and if you don't have one, they're a pain in the ass to make. So if you do want to do these type of connectors, you're going to have to get the Weather Pack crimp tool, and also the tool to remove the pins, which is a few bucks, but I can tell you how many times I've broken things off, and it's real helpful. We're getting towards the end of this segment, and one of the last things that we haven't talked about is electrical tape, and there's a variety of different brands and styles. I wholeheartedly recommend you get a good quality tape. In the old days when I had the 99-cent 12 rolls of vinyl wrap tape that came blister packed, awful stuff. As soon as they get under your engine compartment or any heat or cold, the glue's impossible to remove, or they unwrap on you. It's just low quality stuff. Buy a name brand. I've used a lot of the Super 33 from Scotch. They have a high temp one as well that I've used in the engine compartment. Good stuff. The tape doesn't unravel. It doesn't leave a sticky goo when you undo it, and it's better to spend a little bit more money on a roll of tape than the crap that you can get at the hardware store that's not rated. So it's important. You'll end up using that hopefully sparingly if you do a nice harness, but you will use it. I've wrapped entire harnesses with the Super 33, and I think it's the other one's possibly Super 88. Good stuff. They come in a full-size roll, not like a simulated large roll with a giant core. So you get some value out of it, and a nice handy case. It's great for the track pack, taking the toolbox to the track, jam one of those in there. And I think in the last, we're long on time, and like I said, we're just scratching the surface on a lot of this equipment. The last thing I'll throw out is a flavor of a testing tool, because we're going to get into much more complicated or higher tech tools in a future segment, but one of them that's really a lifesaver is the simple test light. And this is as simple a tool as you could have in your toolbox. It's really just a light bulb with a clip on one end and a pointy scratch all on the other end. And this is a really nice tool for tracing wires to see if a circuit's energized, finding problems. The sharp point allows you to pierce the skin of a wire real easy, and then see if it's in fact powered up. And this is about $10 for the Made in USA version. These are available at every import place for a couple of bucks at most. This is a nice quality one. It has a good cord strain release, and highly recommended if you can do any electrical. You know, just basically checking to see if the battery's working. You can get a light test. You can make this exact same thing yourself with a light bulb and a socket with a couple of wires, and don't think it won't be as effective. So this is a great tool. This is something that's just good to, as a simple, is it hot? Is it working? Am I getting energized? Is the fuse blown? Good, very helpful tool. As we get into the future segment, as I mentioned, we'll look at some of the higher tech gears, multimeters, oscilloscope, battery testers, and whatnot, and code readers. And thanks for watching this episode. And don't forget, keep those projects moving. No, sir, officer. Jeff clearly is wearing his seatbelt. And we do have a permit for filming here in the Burbank-Glendale area. It's going to be a class war, a holy war of electric car Prius drivers.
Yeah.